Hey, welcome everybody from YouTube, Patreon, Facebook. I'm once again your boy G Ward here doing another Behind Enemy Lines interview with my friend Andrew. Introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name's Andrew. I'm a local business owner here out in Knoxville. I also, work full time for a telecoms company and do some of the work within our union for CWA. So kind of get to see it all here in the South.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that. So, in the wider area, in Knoxville and all around the South, we were just talking about how after last summer's response to the George Floyd incident, after lots of activism, after lots of lobbying, after a year of tumultuous times, right?
Mhm.
Different cities around the area, including Knoxville, have political leaders who are showing their either support, right? I've seen some there's a guy named Will Jawando. I think he's on the city council in, I got to look at and see where it is. I think it's Maricopa County in Maryland, but they're literally removing all the school resource officers from the schools.
Yeah.
So they're hearing people saying, look at that response versus, for example, in Knoxville, after a cop came in and literally just killed the student last month.
hmm
We were just discussing our local mayor, Mr. Glenn Jacobs, Kane himself.
hmm
His response was very different. What will we talk about there?
So with the most recent budget that was passed, I think this past week, he actually decided, instead of doubling down on escalation of force training, which, we all know that our officers need, um, on, giving medical training to officers on, all the possibilities that we had to fund things, like prioritizing care, prioritizing being a positive part of the community. Seems like Mayor Jacobs just saw everything happening, saw all the innocent, people, unarmed people being murdered, or even, by the way, guilty people in some cases who aren't subject to execution, because you can actually commit a crime and then not be executed for it,
Right.
right? It is not the job of the police to, hand out those educations, but or those executions. But he seems to have decided, just, hey, good job, guys. We're going to give you all a raise, and that's how we're going to deal with all this.
And I think
So,
those things, you mentioned just different ways to find an excuse. It's not even about whether you are wrong in the scenario. Like with the scenario in Knoxville with the young man, of course, everybody, he had a gun. Okay. If we're being honest with each other, right? How often do you think in Lenore City, Loudoun, Oak Ridge, Maryville, Farragut, you telling me none of the students have ever had a scenario where somebody had a gun?
oh, bro, when I was in high school, right? So there was a friend of mine. His girlfriend had just broken up with him, and I was friends with the girl too. So the young lady, approached me and she was like, "Hey man, here's what's up. Here's this note right here. He's saying right here he's gonna bring a shotgun to school tomorrow and he's gonna kill everybody." Whatever. So I'm like, well, that's awkward. So I took it to our SRO at the time in Little Sweetwater, and well, first I took it to the vice principal. Then she went with me to the SRO, and he wouldn't take a meeting with me despite me telling him what it was about, because he was mad at me for parking where I wasn't supposed to park at the time in the parking lot.
Priorities.
I literally said, "Hey man, that's cool. You can do whatever you need to do about that. This guy's gonna bring a gun tomorrow, and like he's gonna shoot some people." And he was like, "I don't want to talk to you." So that compared to what the response of sending people in and killing a child, you know.
And when you watch that video, there are two other cops there. They're talking to him, doing what you would expect a human
Mhm.
being to do, right? Despite a gun being there. But there's one officer who's just like, nah, I'm here. It's I don't want to make light of it at all. But if you literally watch the Falcon and Winter Soldier series on Disney Plus, have you seen that at all?
I have, yeah, yeah.
So he's U.S. agent. He's literally like, enough talking. I'm busting in the room. Except for now, we see real world consequences to somebody with power, with that mindset.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy, man. And there's no way to separate it from everything else happening in the economy, in life. Throughout this pandemic, you kind of see all of this just flows together.
Mhm.
We're talking about, of course, the situation with CWA and the things happening in Knoxville. I remember a year ago there was another strike, correct?
That was. Mhm.
So what was the kind of resolution to it that time, and how did that evolve into what we're seeing now?
Well, essentially, that was for like the wireline side of the union. And so the union had worked together with the company negotiating a contract, right? Put all this work in, took all this time. They come to a good agreement, and then it turns out AT&T didn't actually through that whole thing didn't actually send the people who had the authority to negotiate the contract. So they were not negotiating in good faith.
What?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so in
So
other words, they said, all right, we agree to term 1, 2, 3.
right.
And then the company just said, nah, shenanigans.
Yeah. And so, our guys had to go out there. They picketed, um, and eventually they got the contract negotiated. But to me, that's like a slap in the face. To me, that seems to me honestly like a power play, and it's that kind of thing that should elicit. To me, that should elicit a stronger response. That should elicit a stronger kind of call to arms for the workers in our union and for workers generally. You know, I mean, we can look at all the different struggles that we're having in our society. The race struggle. We can look at struggles that mentally disadvantaged people or mentally ill or disabled people have, or just disabled people generally. But it seems like the overarching theme seems to be the struggle of the working class against the ruling class, right? Because you've got those who work, and those can actually be wealthy people. Those can be doctors, those can be engineers. That's intellectual labor, right? But then you've got individuals like just shareholders, trust fund babies, people who use money to make money, right? So when you have these super powerful, rulers of the working class, the people, the capitalists, they're gonna want to demean a union. They're gonna want to, show everybody like, hey, we can get away with X, Y, and Z, yada yada. And then if we allow that, I mean, it begs more punishment.
It further guts the power of the union because what stops them from just doing that next time? You negotiate a contract and shenanigans. Nah,
Yep, exactly, man. And I mean, the ruling class trains us with misinformation from jump. Man, I'm still unlearning so many things, from my primary education. I mean, it was only a few years ago that I learned Christopher Columbus was not a hero.
mm,
He was a genocidal psychopath who was literally disowned by the throne. Like they literally were like, "No, you're a piece of garbage, even by our standards." You know, and it's just crazy. Like it's crazy that we don't have, uh, you know, education on the labor movement early on, because these are laborers teaching laborers,
mm.
and we're not even teaching our children about those few victories that we have accomplished. We don't have true education on racial history in the United States. If I did that, I remember that they were trying to pass some curriculum, I think in Texas, that made that cast the founding fathers as being like anti-slave,
Right.
anti-slavery. Like, oh, they didn't want slavery, yada yada. What do you mean? They founded the country with slave. Like, what are y'all talking about?
It's literally
It,
how they got money.
it's crazy, man. Like people, we gotta have that class consciousness. At some point, the light bulb has to turn on.
I think, I mean, it's one of those things where, of course, it can get better after it's all been knocked down. And I think people really haven't accounted for what really happened in 2020.
Mhm.
It was pretty much the system crashing. That's what it
Yeah.
was. Now we put it on life support and pumped a bunch of money in and rebuilt it real quickly. But I think it has clicked in a good amount of people's heads that wait a minute, the thing didn't actually work anymore. You had to come in and like pull the curtain back and have the workers come in and like work on it. And we all saw that.
Yeah.
Usually it's kind of done in a way where no, capitalism's fine.
It just has to, constantly be bailed out by socialism, but whatever.
No, this time I think it was pretty clear to everybody. Everything came to a grinding halt
Hmm.
or just completely just crashed and burned. And then we pumped a bunch of money in, fixed it in various ways, restarted. So for me, it's meant, 1099 freedom. I'm doing again dashing foodie, war media and entertainment, and just self-ownership. Uh, you know, that's my way of dealing with it. But there's some people who are just pretty much just going to the streets because they weren't that far from the situation already before.
Hmm.
So 2020 just knocked them down. For those people who are still holding on, I understand how the propaganda that you're going to lose what little you have if you do this with the union, right? How
Yeah.
that's an effective tactic. So when we looked at that union drive against Amazon down in Bessemer, Alabama, I think a lot of people across the country were looking at that. And of course, in the end, they were defeated. But those kind of tactics, those kinds of strategies to stifle your union are actually things that are being potentially outlawed if we can get progress on something like the PRO Act. What have
Yeah.
you seen about that? What have you thought? And what would that mean to have something like that there in Tennessee?
Man, the PRO Act is the most sweeping uh, legislation on labor since 1963. The PRO Act is everyone should know about this right now already, right? I can't blame them if they don't, but this is something that should be all over the headlines. You know what I'm saying? There's probably a reason that it's not.
Right.
So the PRO Act is the People's Right to Organize Act. Essentially, it could be the end to so-called right to work laws, right? Which right to work laws really just means right to fire laws. I mean, let's just be real with it. So some of the things that it does, companies, big corporations like to kick the can down the road as much as possible whenever a group of workers begins trying to organize. Their labor attorneys, which have honed themselves over hundreds of years now, in anti-union practices, will find every way. Oh, we've got to arbitrate to decide this. Look, we got to take our time. We got to arbitrate. It's going to be a few more months. Okay, but wait, how about this? This comma was out of place over here. So da da da. Well, so one of the things that the PRO Act actually provides for is once it can be shown that there is majority favor for a union contract, right? If the company is putting off the election, but it can be shown on behalf of the union that there is majority favor, then the company will have to begin dealing with the union as if the election had already happened.
Mm,
So if they want to keep kicking the can down the road, then all they're really going to do is prevent themselves from having a contract where, they can be a little bit more satisfied with what's going on. And instead, they've got to deal directly with that union immediately.
it moves the negotiation up in the process.
Yes, yes. It would also allow for everyone that is covered by a union to be required to pay union dues. That terrifies a lot of people because you hear the word, "Oh, I've got to pay for some odd, I got to pay for something." They're going to make me pay whatever. Okay, so here's the problem: you get a lot of people that are represented by the union who don't pay into that at all, right? So that representation can be very expensive. Sometimes it can be low cost, as far as something simple like, oh, I want to invoke my wine garden rights, which are your rights to not submit to an investigatory meeting without a union representative there. So your union rep can come in and just make sure that your manager is not messing you over. It can be something low cost like that, or It can be, oh, they came in and fired everybody in this store because they've all got 20 plus years of tenure and they're tired of paying the money for 20 plus years of tenure. So now the union needs to step in and pay for, legal fees, all that, and get your job back.
And that's a
So,
I've worked in call centers where I literally saw they came to the conclusion that XYZ employees with so much tenure or so insurance plans that were expensive in a certain area, right? Let's just get rid of everybody in that age range, and you would see
yep.
entire departments gotten rid of, right?
Hmm.
And they would give people the choice, like basically become like a level one and start over in this job, or you can quit and get a little bit of money and just absolve us of the responsibility of paying that nice pension you were going to get.
Exactly. Exactly. And what's crazy, man. So I worked for Verizon Cellular Sales for a while. It's like an authorized retailer of Verizon services. When I worked for them, I'm pretty sure I was making $10 an hour or commission, right? So if I made more commission than $10 an hour, which I usually did, I've always done pretty well with sales. I'd make this, but I wouldn't make both. When I switched over to AT&T, the difference being union. Let's see. Now I believe I'm not completely sure, but I think I make 18 an hour plus commission, and the commissions are really pretty good. And again, that difference is union representation.
Mhm.
When I worked for cellular sales, man, there was some rough stuff going on. If I sold a phone to somebody, that commission got split across the floor, which I was fine with. But if that person canceled within like 6 months and a day, not only did my commission get reversed, but the cost of that phone, like half the cost of that phone, got deducted from everyone's paychecks. You
Mm.
know what I'm saying? AT&T, similar rule, 6 months and a day, I believe. Somebody cancels, all that happens is you just lose the commission for that sale. When we had management problems at cellular sales, that was our problem. I
Mm.
saw managers cuss people up and down, man. I saw people, get treated rough. I've got a friend who tells stories working there, about sexual assault, things of that nature. Now I can't speak to that for sure. I don't know what happened there, but I've heard so many horror stories. Whereas at AT&T, there was recently a situation where a manager was doing what, some folks considered unfair. So those folks invoked their Weingarten rights. Well, that manager decided to retaliate, said, go home, without pay, yada, yada. So I call my union rep and I'm like, hey, man, this is what happened. It's clearly a violation of the NLRA,
Mm.
Section 8A1. He's like, cool, give me just a minute. I get a call from, the boss's boss who's like, hey, enjoy your day off. It's a paid day off, and I'm gonna set this right. Like that,
Mm.
like that, that representation matters. And it's so hard so often to get that representation because let's say it's not already there. Let's say I don't have a network of union reps, a network of stewards, of union president, et cetera, who can teach me what my rights are because I had to have people guide me to the literature. Now I'm fairly well read on it myself, but ultimately, let's just say I'm working for some fast food franchise
Mhm.
and I get assaulted by a manager, right? Well, what actually can happen there? They own the cameras, right? So who's to say that footage doesn't go missing?
Right.
Let's say I get fired for whatever, some discriminatory reason. I'm a type 1 diabetic. Let's say they fire me for that. Okay. What do? I am now unemployed. I was underemployed. So we know my savings aren't that great. And then I'm going to hire a lawyer. I'm going to hire an attorney and go after them. Nah, it can't happen. So, with the PRO Act allowing people to organize, I truly believe that once people come out from the fear of these right to work laws,
Mm.
I believe we'll get that more. I believe, we'll be able to have better outreach. We can do things like salting, which I think you and I talked about briefly, which is something I'm really interested in. And we can really lift up our community at the expense. And I absolutely want to highlight there will be an expense.
Mm.
That expense needs to be at the expense of the people who own these companies, at the expense of the people who are making money off of our labor without putting in any of their own.
A big thing about that PRO Act too, a couple of things actually. One of them is it proposes to include 1099 and independent contractors, right?
Yes.
That would have the effect of greatly increasing the ranks, so greatly increasing the power of the unions themselves.
Hmm.
And also, what that would do is also get people just in the mindset. I think this is one thing that's been lost huge, just because so many people aren't in unions. So many people for years, all they really heard about is, oh, they're gonna make you pay money and they're corrupt too, et cetera, right?
Hmm.
Is culturally, there's a good part of the country who are just, as soon as they hear the word union, they're just like, ah,
Yeah.
right? Versus what some of our parents might have experienced, where just growing up, the union's there, going to the union hall, going to this union event, having XYZ scholarship paid for by this union, right? That was just a normal course of life.
Hmm.
Just the image of what a union was in your head was just totally different, right? And also, it really would engender kind of more cooperation between unions, right? One thing you'll see is now any given policy comes up, and there'll be maybe some unions that are pro change X and some unions that are against, some unions
Hmm.
don't participate, some unions that kind of are agnostic or have, basically lobbying within their own ranks. One of the things that will really change if we see the PRO Act happen is, again, because unions will become more of a normal thing for more people, is that if they see a strike happening with some industry they're not personally involved in at all, they're more likely to just say, support the union just off top. Just say, I see there's a picket line. You don't cross that picket line. You don't apply for that job. We support unions just as an idea is alien. Um, After the past 40 years, that would be something we have to kind of build from the ground up, kind of like the guys in the 1930s were doing.
Hmm.
Because remember, they were dealing with people who had never heard of it. There was no such thing. So it's crazy how it goes in cycles. And we actually are probably closer to the experience of those guys in the 1930s now, because the power of these companies like Amazon, Walmart, even your unions, AT&T, Verizon, even having a steel workers union in a town and dealing with this company, dealing with this coal miner company, that's one thing. But dealing with these multi-billion-dollar international conglomerates with deals with governments, the kind of assets that, yes, if you don't have collective bargaining to deal with them, you basically are a number. They can literally.
Oh yeah, 100%, man. And yeah, like you mentioned the 1099 employees, it does. It essentially says, hey, look, if you're a chef and you hired a guy to pour concrete for a patio out back, that guy is a contractor. You don't know him, healthcare, you don't know him, etc. But if you are a contractor and that guy is pouring concrete for your company, right? And then you find out, if you find out if he's a captive employee, meaning you find out he's also pouring company for this one over here and you fire him, that wasn't a contractor. You're just trying to take advantage of the 1099 system.
Mm.
And it's crazy. Like we've been, born and bred into this idea of, oh, that's business savvy. No, it's crooked. What it is crooked. So companies will use 1099. It also addresses falsely naming employees management. So that's something that we're handling at CWA, with AT&T. So there are various departments in AT&T that are considered, management, right? Or at least were. There's one particular department, in-home agents, in-home experts, up in Arkansas. there was a market that we finally unionized of these particular agents who obviously, wanted to unionize. And the company kept saying, no, they're managers, they're managers. So we challenged it. And the labor board essentially found, okay, these guys can't fire, they can't hire, they can't discipline. They have no subordinates. Does not meet the definition.
Mm.
So the PRO Act would abolish a lot of that for us so that we don't have to go market by market, town by town, fighting that. It would essentially end that practice. And if companies, sought after that, then, it would be much easier to challenge.
Mm.
And
Gotcha.
then, in a lot of cases with these unfair labor practices like that, the PRO Act also provides for ability to seek damages against these companies. And
Mm.
man, I'll tell you that right there, that's where you really, that's where you really gain power because you start hitting them in their purse,
Right.
and it's going to be a problem.
And
It's going to be,
stockholders and stakeholders start saying, hey,
yeah, exactly,
so
exactly.
tools the unions need. And like you were saying before, people don't like the idea of needing to pay into a union, but the whole thing needs to be driven home. You're building a base of power. You're not just doing
Yeah,
something because you have to do it. You you actually get something out of being in this union. And I think again, just like those guys in the 30s, that has to be a focus of unions today. Really driving home, you still have to educate people why this is valuable. They don't take it for granted that this is valuable.
yeah,
We can argue about the wisdom of that, but that's just the reality we're facing. You have a public that doesn't necessarily take it for granted that this is a necessary thing, a helpful thing to me. So showing them ways that, in your life right now, this will do X, right?
mhm,
Problem X is going to be solved. And we got to make sure that when we're going for union drives, especially if we have those significant dues that are going to generate money and power, got to make sure we're always staying in people's lives and staying relevant to them.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, the dues, man, are like, I think I pay something like $40 a month,
God,
$40 a month, but I more than doubled my pay
mm,
by being in this union job, compared to non-union. And even if we forget everything else, even if we forget the fact that I have dignity, right? Let's just write that off. God forbid we overvalue that, but I'm more than doubling my money. Like, why? It's a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer.
got you. Man, it's one of those things that we can sit and talk about it for a long time because just seeing how it looks, especially with things like the green rush happening across the country, more than half the states. Now we're at 26 states that have legalized marijuana.
Mhm.
The amount of jobs and literally entire industries that are just popping up across the country are incalculable. You're not gonna really
Wow.
know until years later to look back and say, how man, look, this whole city was supported by this, right? So having unions there on the ground floor as opposed to come in and try to patch something together afterwards, right? That has to be huge. So I'm very curious to hear about what those labor unions for farmers, urban farmers and otherwise, are going to be talking about here in Jersey. And I want to see that conversation in Tennessee happening. So, you know,
Yeah, man, and now is the perfect time. You're right. The marijuana industry is bringing just a massive amount of jobs, a massive amount of revenue. As we switch more to solar and wind and alternative energy, guess what? Massive amount of jobs, etc. And if you pair that, for example, with a pandemic where, the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry, again, you're seeing so much revenue coming in through that. Right now it is most critical because if we wait until capital takes over this wave of revenue, this wave of jobs, then man, we're going to be in the position we're at right now with everything else,
mhm,
right? Because right now we're discussing, how beneficial it would be to have unions there, but we're also discussing these are super powerful corporations
right.
and they don't want unions. We got to get in ground level. So with, the cannabis jobs, with the alternative fuel jobs, with every kind of job out there, we got to have the workers aware, and we got to be there ground level to be like, hey guys, they're trying to grow. They need 100 more of us by yesterday. They need us. We need to make sure that they remember that. We need to unionize. We need to make sure that this is an industry for our communities
Mhm.
immediately.
So, hey, once again, everybody out there watching on Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, and so many more platforms. I'm working hard trying to add us to as many platforms as possible. Check in, like, share, subscribe, and check in again. I'm sure we're gonna have Andrew on again to talk about some more of these issues. Uh, Anything else you want to let the people know? Any events coming up?
As far as events, not just right now. Everything's a little bit tough, in the pandemic. I would say, our fellow members of CWA, especially, the employees of AT&T, check out when your union meetings are. I know it's a little bit tough right now, but a lot of these locals are accommodating with Zoom. They're being really careful, in the union hall as far as spacing and all that. Get more involved. Get more involved. God, especially, over on the mobility side, all of us out there slinging some cell phones and whatnot, get together with your workers, learn, let's talk about the wine garden rights, and let's talk about solidarity. You know, let's figure out what we got to do to make our union strong. And special thanks to IWW, and a lot of the other unions out there really putting in that work and fighting a good fight.
And hey, brother, I appreciate you. Anytime you're talking about unions, especially in the South, you're taking a risk. So, man,
Yeah.
I tell you again, I appreciate you for what you're doing.
Hell yeah, man. I appreciate the platform. I really do. Love to have another talk.
And even myself, I'll put my skin in the game because, again, 1099 workers, I'm working with DoorDash. That
Mm.
conversation will be coming. So, when
Yeah.
that comes up, I definitely want to bring you on and we'll talk about this again, brother.
Hey, we'll do it, man.
All right, thanks again.